Okay, so for next time, we're just going to finish the parable of the sower. And there will also be, I think it will be Grace's turn. She'll be populating your region, Nick. So if you need to know how to get in touch with her, then just let me know. And
She has everything.
She
I gave her
okay.
my entire.
Oh, you already gave her.
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right. Well then, what's that? Okay. So before we get back into talking about parable of the sower, because we are getting on to the end of the term here. I think we've got what, 2 weeks before finals after the break. Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, usually after the Thanksgiving break, it's 1 week.
Yeah, it's not long.
Yeah.
The last day of classes is the 8th.
Yeah. So, before we get started today, I just want to know if anybody has any questions about the final exam or about anything to do with the final paper assignment.
I have a question about
Yes.
the character you assigned us.
Yes.
What are we doing with that character?
So the end result of the world building exercise is we're going to play a little short Dungeons and Dragons adventure in the world that you've all created together.
Are you going to show us how to do that? 'Cause I
Yes.
don't know how to.
Yes. It's really, it's actually not very hard. It mostly involves rolling a 20-sided die and adding a number to it. And yeah, so essentially, like the way something will typically work is I'll describe a situation to you. You will tell me what you want your character to do. I'll tell you what to add to the die. You roll it, and that determines how well your character does it. So say you're trying to sneak past a guard, right? I will tell you to roll and add your stealth score. And if you get a good roll that is a high roll, then you have a better chance of getting past the guard. If you get a low roll, then he probably notices you. And that's the basic mechanic for the game. Yeah, it's really not very hard.
I would recommend. And some of them get really funny. I know the BuzzFeed group has a D&D. If you go on YouTube, you can watch some very short campaigns, and they do get fun.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I did when I was
Yeah.
and it helped.
Yeah. There are lots of I think Critical Role. I think is a YouTube web series that you can watch that would give you some sense of what the basic how to play the game basically. Plus, I mean, I've been playing this game since I was 10, so I can help you. Any other questions about the final assignments?
Mine is not the final assignment. Is it the final is going to be just like midterm?
The final is going to be like the midterm, but a little bigger, yes, because you will have more time. So there will be, instead of choosing one essay question, you'll choose 2 essay questions, and you will do 10 rather than 8 IDs. But yeah, I will give you, I'll give you the sample questions for the sample essay questions when we meet on Wednesday, so that you've got plenty of time to prepare. And I will also, if y'all want, I'll do a review session. Sometime we can figure out at the end of the last week of classes. We can maybe just kind of sit down for 2 hours and go over stuff so that you feel confident in the material. But we can. I'll be ready to schedule that on Wednesday. So yeah, we'll think about when you're free. I'll look at when I'm free, and when the exam is, and then we'll get something scheduled. And I will also give you all a list of I know the IDs will be taken from the vocab quizzes you've been doing. So I'll give you a list of the ones that I particularly want you to know. All right, any other questions? All right, then let's get back into Octavia Butler. So how did this middle section of the parable of the sower go for you? What'd you think? Okay.
Very violent,
Yes. Yeah, things.
extremely violent.
Yeah, things go downhill pretty fast, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It is extremely violent, and yeah, there are many passages that are fairly disturbing. It's not. Yeah,
It's not a pretty fast
no,
part of the book.
no. So, I guess what we probably need to deal with is the extent to which the ugliness of this part of the book is necessary, right? Or and the extent to which we're prepared for it by earlier portions of the novel, right? So, did y'all feel like the level of violence in this part of the book was set up in prior chapters, or did you feel like it was like it just kind of came too fast out of nowhere?
I think, like in my opinion, I feel like it came way too fast, but you knew something was going to end up happening to the neighborhood
Okay.
eventually. I just didn't think it would be on that level.
Okay.
Because, up until this point, she's been reading her father's survival books, trying to get her friends to make, and other community members to make go packs. She's burying money in the yard, and like tucking away things as she goes. Just trying to be prepared and be ready should that day ever come.
Yeah.
And everyone's kind of just more or less pushed her off.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing to think about here. So Lauren has been preparing, right? We've seen steps of various kinds of escalation in the neighborhood as well, right? Like for example, they've got that neighborhood patrol, right, where they go around in pairs. But is that the same sort of thing?
No.
Why not?
Because she's preparing to live outside the walls.
Yeah. Exactly. Rather than focusing on preserving what already exists, right? She is preparing herself for change, right? She is preparing herself for the possibility that the social order as they know it could break down, right? And we see a lot of her neighbors and even family members resisting that idea, right? Her stepmother, for example, still seems to think that things are going to go back to the way they were. So let's actually look at the chapter where they're talking about this other city, Olivar, right? That has been bought by a corporation. All right, if you turn to page 118, right, Tuesday, October 20th, 2026. Can I get somebody to start reading for us from Something New is Beginning?
Something new is beginning, or perhaps something old and nasty is reviving. A company called Kagimoto, Stamm, Frampton, and company KSF has taken over the running of a small coastal city called Olivar. Olivar, incorporated in the 1980s, is just one more beach bedroom suburb of Los Angeles, small and well-to-do. It has a little industry, much hilly, vacant land, and a short, crumbling coastline. Its people, like some here in Robledo neighborhood, earn salaries that would once have made them prosperous and comfortable. In fact, Olivar is a lot richer than we are. But since it's a coastal city, its taxes are higher, and since some of its land is unstable, it has extra problems. Parts of it sometimes crumble into the ocean. undercut or deeply saturated by salt water. Sea level keeps rising with the warming climate, and there is occasional earthquake. Bolivar's flat, sandy beach is already just a memory. So are the houses and the businesses that used to sit on the beach. Like coastal cities all over the world, Bolivar needs special help. It's an upper middle class, white, literate community of people who once had a lot of weight to throw around. Now not even the politicians it's helped to elect will stand by it. The whole state, the country, the world needs help. It's been told. What the hell is Tiny Bolivar whining about?
Okay, so let's sort of break down what's going on in this paragraph here. So what are we told about Bolivar?
It's a company town.
It's being turned into a company town, right? Yeah. Now, what does that mean? What is a company town?
The company owns the land and
Mhm.
all the residents pay their taxes to the company.
Yes. And oftentimes, so the company is going to be responsible for maintenance and for public services, right? And for security. But this also means that the residents owe something now to the company rather than to the state, right? So what we see here is another example of that privatization of public property that was discussed in the first part of the novel, right? Where, it starts off with these federal science programs, right? And now we see a whole town kind of moving from public to private. But what else is particularly kind of noteworthy here about Bolivar?
So only white people live there.
Okay, yeah, we're told, it's a white community. And what else? What other characteristics do its residents share?
They're middle class.
Yep, middle to upper middle class. So yeah, relatively affluent. And what else are they that seems like an odd thing to point out? It's an upper middle class,
They're
white.
literate.
Yeah, literate. Now, we live in a culture of near universal, at least basic literacy, right? I imagine that probably none of you knows an adult who is not cognitively disabled who can't read, right? That's relatively rare. But yeah, here it's specifically pointed out that Bolivar is a literate community. So what does that tell us, that she feels the need to point this out to us?
That is not common.
Yeah, that literacy is becoming rare, right? Or at least rare enough that it's becoming a class marker again, right? We see something similar going on when her brother Keith comes home with money that he's made on the outside, right? How is Keith making his money? What's he doing?
Reading and writing for thieves.
Yeah, he's fallen in with a group of thieves who've stolen a bunch of really cool stuff, but they can't read the manuals, so they don't know how to use it. But because Keith is literate, they keep him around, right, so that he can read the manuals for them. So literacy, is becoming an unusual skill. Now, what about Bolivar's geographical and geological situation? What's happening to it?
The sea level keeps rising and the infrastructure is falling into it.
Yeah, it's literally falling into the sea, right?
Yeah. Which is what conspiracy theorists have hinted is going to happen to California eventually.
Uh-huh.
Especially if the San Andreas Fault has one good solid earthquake.
Yeah, well, and and the thing is too, is it's like remember that one thing that science fiction tends to do is extrapolate from existing science, right? It's like, if things continue along particular trend lines, right, what are some possible futures here? And I think that, like, while it's maybe a little bit conspiracy-ish to say that California will fall into the sea, right? People have been saying that for about 40, 50 years now. It's not all that controversial or conspiracy-ish to say that California, or much of it, may end up underwater again, right? I mean, at a time when the planet was warmer in the past, where we are sitting right now was underwater. That is actually one of the reasons why much of the soil in this part of the southeast is particularly good for certain kinds of farming. It's because there are all these, marine fossils that rotted into it. But I digress. But we have a city here that is literally falling into a sea. So it is geographically precarious, right? So, what's the best that a place like this can hope for? Is this a place that can actually, by selling out to this KSF company, right? Can they actually stop the things that are happening to them?
Maybe they can stave it off for a little while.
Yeah, it's just another delaying action, right? Right, like the laser wire and the neighborhood patrols in Robledo, right? They can't stop the sea from swallowing up the city. But in order to stay put, right, in order to try to preserve things as they are, on some level, right, they're willing to sell out to this particular company. Right? Somewhat richer and less geologically active communities are getting help. Dikes, seawalls, evacuation assistance, whatever's appropriate. Olivar, located between the sea and Los Angeles, is getting an influx of salt water from one direction and desperate poor people from the other. It has a solar-powered desalination plant on some of its flatter, more stable land, and that provides its people with a dependable supply of water. So this is what's desirable about Olivar, right? A potential dependable source of water provided by a solar-powered, therefore not requiring any other source of electricity, desalination plant. Right, they can just pull the salt right out of the water. But it can't protect itself from the encroaching sea, the crumbling earth, the crumbling economy, or the desperate refugees. Even getting back and forth to work for those few who can't work at home was becoming as dangerous for them as it is for our people, a kind of terrible gauntlet that has to be run over and over again. Then the people of KSF showed up. After many promises, much haggling, suspicion, fear, hope, and legal wrangling, the voters and the officials of Olivar permitted their town to be taken over, bought out, privatized. KSF will expand the desalination plant to vast size. That plant will be the first of many. The company intends to dominate farming and the selling of water and solar and wind energy over much of the Southwest, where for pennies, it's already bought vast tracts of fertile, waterless land. So far, Olivar is one of its smaller coastal holdings, but with Olivar it gets an eager, educated workforce, people a few years older than I am whose options are very limited. and there's all that formerly public land that they now control. They mean to own great water, power, and agricultural industries in an area that most people have given up on. They have long-term plans, and the people of Olivar have decided to become part of them, to accept smaller salaries in their socioeconomic group is used to in exchange for security, a guaranteed food supply, jobs, and help in their battle with the Pacific. There are still people in Olivar who are uncomfortable with the change. They know about early American company towns in which the companies cheated and abused people. So this is the whole company town thing, right? And I think that, we've talked a little bit already about generational difference here between characters, right? And how the generation of Lauren's parents seem to be nostalgic for 20th century norms, right? For things to go back to the way they were in, say the 70s and the 80s. While Lauren and certain other members of her own generation, right, recognize this as unlikely or impossible, but I would argue it's because several of the ones who disagree are the ones who actually have a deeper knowledge of history. Right. We don't get a sense, for example, that when Corey is talking about potentially moving to Olivar, that she is thinking of or even aware of the history of company towns, right? But Lauren is. And the other residents of the neighborhood who are suspicious of what's going on in Olivar are aware of this history as well, right? So I think, people with a broader historical view, with a longer historical view, seem to be less likely to accept these kinds of quick fixes. So let's look at the argument that Lauren's father and Corey have over moving to Olivar. Can I get somebody to start reading from, but this is to be different on page 120.
So this is to be different. The people of Olivar aren't frightened, impoverished victims. They're able to look after themselves, their rights, and their property. They're educated people who don't want to live in the spreading chaos of the rest of Los Angeles County. Some of them said so on the radio documentary we all listened to last night, as they made a public spectacle of selling themselves to KSE.
Okay, pause there for a second, right? So how are the residents of Olivar describing and defining themselves in this radio documentary?
They're happy to do it. They're educated.
Uh-huh. They're educated people who are able to make an informed decision, right?
And they don't want to live in the chaos that's spreading around them.
Yeah. So this is a way of cutting themselves off, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is another layer of laser wire on the walls, right? Yeah. And of denying any kind of social responsibility, right? All that nonsense going on in LA County, that's nothing to do with us. Right, kind of deepening the us versus them divide. Okay, you can keep going.
Good luck to them, Dad said. Not that they'll have much luck in the long run. What do you mean? Corey demanded. I think the whole idea is wonderful. It's what we need. Now, if only some big company would want to do the same thing for Bolito. No, Dad said, thank God, no. If you don't know, why shouldn't they? Bolito's too big, too poor, too black, and too Hispanic to be of interest to anyone, and it has no coastline. What it does have is street poor, body dumps, and a memory of once being well off, of shade trees, big houses, hills, and canyons. Most of those things are still here, but no company will want us. At the end of the program, it was announced that KSF was looking for registered nurses, credentialed teachers, and a few other skilled professionals who would be willing to move to Louvar and work for room and board. The offer wasn't put that way, of course, but that's what it meant. Yet Corey recorded the phone number and called it at once. She and Dad are both teachers, both PhDs. She was desperate to get in ahead of the crowd. Dad just shrugged and let her fall. Room and board. The offer salaries were so low that if Dad and Corey both worked, they wouldn't earn as much as Dad is earning now with the college. And out of it, they'd have to pay rent as well as the usual expenses. In fact, when you add everything up, it's clear that with the 6 of us, they couldn't earn enough to meet expenses. It might work if I could find a job of some kind, but in Olivar, they don't need me. They've got hundreds of me, at least maybe thousands. Every surviving community is full of unemployed, half-educated kids or unemployed, uneducated kids. Continue.
Yeah, we can actually pause here, right? So what is KSF essentially paying people?
Bare necessities.
Yeah, essentially you're working for room and board, right? To have a roof over your head and a meal. And this is a kind of direct end result of what we were talking about last time, Christopher Morpeth Donner's proposals, right? That red tape be eliminated so that companies can essentially hire people to work for peanuts or less than peanuts, right? So Corey is willing to cling desperately to this hope, right? But Lauren's father is a lot more skeptical. Why does he think this is not going to work? Why does he think this is a bad idea?
It sounds good on paper, but in the end, the people are going to end up owing the company more than they can afford to work on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like I grew up in what used to be a big coal mining area. And so all around my hometown were these little old company towns where like not only did the company own all the land and the houses and everything right here, the company was not only your employer, they were also your landlord. And you typically weren't paid in cash. You were paid in company scrip, which was only good at the company store where everything had an inflated price. So you essentially kind of owed everything to the company, and you couldn't pick up and move and change your situation because you didn't have any money that was worth anything outside of the company town. So Olivar, like these old company towns, is essentially another trap, right? And I think that's kind of like the shared pattern here among these affluent communities that the novel describes, is that they are essentially traps, right? Now, if we think about the philosophy that Lauren is developing, writing in her notebooks, what she calls Earthseed, what have you been able to gather so far about what Earthseed is or about what it means? What tenets of this philosophy or religion have you picked up on so far?
It's about change.
Okay, yeah. In fact, she explicitly says right that God is change, right?
change is necessary in order to improve, life overall.
Okay, yeah. And change itself isn't necessarily good or bad, right? But she does argue that it can be shaped. And that human beings are, what distinguishes human beings from other animals is their capability of shaping change, right? So, on one hand, it looks like this is kind of like a philosophy of taking power in a situation in which one feels powerless, right? Where one feels they're at the mercy of other people and events. But I want to focus as well on the name that she gives this, right? Earth's seed. And why that might be relevant, particularly to this notion of like people clustered in small communities desperately defending themselves. What do you have to do with seed in order for it to grow? Yeah.
I think she highlights how plants continue to grow even in places where they normally wouldn't because they go through this chain and they catch on someone's sleeve or on a bird's wing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is one of the reasons why she's so upset about the cancellation of the space program, right? She wants, like, she envisions a future in which humanity spreads out from the Earth to other reaches of the galaxy, right? And she sees that kind of being short-sightedly canceled. So yeah, inherent in the idea of Earth's seed, right, is the idea of diaspora. So do we all know what the word diaspora means, what a diaspora is? What's that?
Culture, community.
Okay, yeah, it is a cult, like, it has to do with culture and community. We tend to frame it usually in, say, like ethnic terms, right?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of last week when we talked about the African.
Afrofuturism, yeah, we talk about, like, an African diaspora or a Jewish diaspora or an Irish diaspora, right? So yeah, we do tend to frame it in cultural or community or ethnic terms, right? But does anybody have any sense of what that actually means? Like what, for example, like the Irish diaspora is?
Things that are like, you said the Irish diaspora, all I can think of is the potato famine.
Yeah, okay, that was actually a big triggering factor.
And like IRA. So like those are the two things that pop up in my
Okay.
head.
Yeah, I mean, the IRA was arguably more popular outside of Ireland than actually in Ireland. Among diaspora communities, are we getting where I'm going here now?
Is it like movement of
Minority?
culture?
Yeah, exactly. It's about spreading out, yeah. Diaspora is about a culture or a group spreading out from its point of origin, right? Now, sometimes this is involuntary, right? So, for example, what we now call the African diaspora, particularly in the Americas, was largely involuntary. The same thing, with the Jewish diaspora out of the Middle East and into various parts of Europe, right? And then from Eastern Europe into the U.S. Like, the potato famine also triggers a largely involuntary diaspora, right? Irish people spreading out to North America, to Britain, and to Australia, largely because there's not enough food on their home island anymore, right? But I think what she's talking about is something more like, kind of like taking control of the diasporic process, right? And I think this is where the novel most directly connects to the idea of Afrofuturism. That it's a future diaspora that is shaped, controlled, and not solely dictated by external circumstances. Or will be, right? The idea that she has. So in that sense, like as violent and disturbing as the destruction of the neighborhood is, and I think we do need to talk about that, is there a sense in which the destruction of Robledo is actually kind of necessary for Lauren's philosophy and its development?
I mean, it has to happen. You never leave it. I mean, she talks about leaving, about wanting to go outside and leave, but I mean, if this didn't happen, she probably would never have left.
Yeah, and she's not the first one to leave either, right? The community's already cracking up before the attack, right?
So this attack is like what really set it off.
Yeah.
The attack was necessary in order for this big change to happen.
Yeah. The slow incremental change wasn't enough, right? The big change is what sets everything in motion. Yeah. Let's try to look at some of the chain of events leading up to this, right? So we have, on the one hand, in the first part of the book, right, when Amy Dunn is shot, this indicates the lack of security in the neighborhood. Right? In fact, we actually try to trace this even further to who's Mrs. Sims, right? The old lady. Who's merely robbed. Right? You have Amy Dunn's death, and then her mother's disappearance, right? Tracy just walks out of the neighborhood and no one knows where. Right, you have Lauren's brother Keith's disappearance and subsequent death, right?
Her father's disappearance.
Yeah, then the disappearance of the father. They have a funeral for him, but they never find a body. Right, her friend's family, the Garfields, moved to Olivar. Right, so the community that she had grown up with, by the time it's destroyed, is already cracking up and emptying out. Right, and then we also have,
Quintilla.
the attack on Mrs. Quintanilla, by the robbers who whack her over the head and leave her for dead, right? Wardell Parrish's house is burned.
And his family's burned in it.
Yep.
Increased number of pyros.
Yeah, let's talk about the whole pyro thing here as well. Right, pyro is the name given both to a drug, right, and to the people who use it. And what are the effects of this drug? What does this drug do?
It makes people
Yeah, it gives people a thrill, like an intense euphoria from watching fire burn, right? And what are the pyro addicts, like, what do they look like?
They have shaved heads and they're painted.
Yeah. Shaved heads and painted faces and bodies, right? And how do they behave? Like, what do pyro addicts do? What's that?
It's set fire to things.
They just set fire to things, yeah.
Commit mass arson.
Yeah, and like, why?
Does it make them feel good?
Yeah, solely for the pleasure of it, right? I mean, you know, when the pyro addicts burn Lauren's neighborhood, right? Do they stick around to loot? The looters all come later, right? And had nothing to do with the burning of the neighborhood. Yeah, the pyro addicts just wanted it to burn, right? So they seem to be concerned with destruction, right, for its own sake. Right, the pyro lifestyle seems to be one of more or less pure nihilism, right? Nothing matters, nothing means anything. There's no way to get ahead, you have no prospects. Might as well just, you know, negate your identity, shave your head, paint yourself green, and start burning things. Right, if we look even at the way the pyros get into the neighborhood, on page 153, can I get somebody to start reading from Everything Was Chaos?
Everything was chaos. People running, screaming, shooting. The gate had been destroyed. Our attackers have driven an ancient truck through it. They must have stolen a truck just to crash it through the gate.
Okay, we can stop there, right? So, why'd they steal the truck? Just to crash into the gate, right? Not for any other purpose. So, instead of destroying to steal, like robbers or thieves do, right? The pyros only steal to help them destroy. Right? Everything they do is in the service of destruction. And yet, when Lauren comes back to the neighborhood the morning after to scavenge, right? You look on page 159. There was a dead green face on our front porch. I went up the steps and stood looking at her. The green face was a woman, tall, lean, bald, but female. And what had she died for? What was the point of all this? Leave her alone. A woman who had a pair of Corey's shoes in her hand strode up to me. She died for all of us. Leave her alone. What do you make of that? How are the looters who come the morning after, basically the Robledo's poor, right? How are they reading the actions of the pyros?
As a blessing.
Yeah. Leave her alone, she died for all of us, right? That the pyro who destroyed the neighborhood did it so that the poor could actually have something to eat or to trade, right? Now, the pyros aren't doing that on purpose, right? There doesn't seem to be any intention behind it. They just, when they're high on the drug, they like destroying things. They like burning things. But the looters are reading their own resentment of the middle-class residents of Robledo into the pyro's actions, right? That the pyro, lying dead on the stoop there, becomes a kind of savior, right? By having sacrificed herself to free up all of the stuff that was being stored in this neighborhood, right? So the scavenging itself actually ends up being a kind of diaspora, right? Where you have not just people, but stuff that is removed from a point of origin where it's been just kind of clustered up and stuck, right? And is then recirculated in the broader community. Now, Lauren's response to this woman is angry, right? She says, "I've never in my life wanted more to kill another human being. Get the hell out of my way," I said. I didn't raise my voice. I don't know how I looked, but the thief backed away. I stepped over the green face and went into the carcass of our home. The other thieves looked at me, but none of them said anything. One pair I noticed was a man with a small boy. The man was dressing the boy in a pair of my brother Gregory's jeans. The jeans were much too big, but the man belted them and rolled them up. And where was Gregory, my clownish smartass of a baby brother? Where was he? Where was everyone? And notice what's the word that Lauren keeps using for the people scavenging the neighborhood?
One pair.
Thieves. Yeah, they're thieves.
Or scavengers. Thieves, scavengers.
Yeah, at least at this stage, right? She's referring to them primarily as thieves. From a technical standpoint, is the word thief accurate?
No, because everybody there is dead.
Yeah. The people to whom this stuff belonged are no longer able to claim it, right? So yeah, scavenger or looter is probably more accurate. But yeah, she specifically uses the word thieves here, right? Now, why do you think that is? Why do you think she thinks of these people as thieves?
Because she still thinks of the owners of the alive. Or at least hopes that they're alive.
Uh-huh. Yeah, even though she's seen most of them dead, right? The neighborhood's destroyed. Nobody's coming back to claim any of this stuff, right? With the exception of her. But yeah, it's hard for her to divorce the stuff from the people who used to own it, right? So, this is still, in a lot of ways, the reaction of someone who has always had, at the very least, what she needed provided for her, right? And the next thing she observes, right, is that the roof of her house had fallen in. So the house itself is destroyed, right? The house itself is no longer intact, and her own bedroom, right, can't be salvaged, right? Her own private space has been invaded and destroyed. And I think like once she has witnessed the destruction in her bedroom, her attitude seems to change a little bit, right? In that she allows the man with the small boy to take some of her father's stuff without any protest or complaint, right? Although part of this is also sentimental attachment, maybe because she thinks the little boy looks a little bit like her brother. I dug a dried apricot out of my pack and held it out to him. He couldn't have been more than 6, but he wouldn't touch the food until the man told him to. Good discipline. But at the man's nod, he snatched the apricot, bit off a tiny taste, then stuffed the rest into his mouth whole. I think what's important about this really short scene here is that it shows that social trust isn't entirely dead here, right? That there is a possibility for rebuilding social trust on the outside. And we're going to see a similar episode play out near the end of this section when Lauren protects the couple with the baby from the water thieves, right? And thus begins the process of growing their little group. But let's kind of shift from this for a minute to what their experiences are like on the highway. So what's weird about the way people are traveling on the highways now? Yeah. Highways are still what people use to get, between hubs, right? But for the most part, people walk on them now. And what else is weird about like the way these highways work? Let's go to page 176. Can I get one of you to start reading from We Walked Down to the Freeway, the 118?
We walked down the freeway at the 118 and turned west. We would take the 118 to the 23 and the 23 to US 101. The 101 would take us up the coast toward Oregon. We became part of a broad river of people walking west on the freeway. Only a few straggled east against the current, east toward the mountains and the desert. Where were the westward walkers going? To something or just away from here? We saw a few trucks, most of them run at night, swarms of bikes or electric cycles, and 2 cars. All these had plenty of room to speed along the outer lanes past us. We're safer if we keep the left lanes away from the on and off ramps. It's against the law in California to walk on the freeways. The law is archaic. Everyone who walks on the freeway sooner or later. Freeways provide the most direct routes between cities and parts of cities. Dad walked or bicycled on them often. Some prostitutes and peddlers of food, water, and other necessities live along the freeways in sheds or shacks or in the open air. Beggars, thieves, and murderers live here too.
Okay, let's pause here for a second, right? So, first off, when you imagine a freeway now, what do you typically think of?
For traffic.
Okay, yeah. It sucks, or it's a pain in the ass. Freeways are awful. There's nothing free about them.
You can go faster on them than you would a normal road.
Yeah, they're if you're driving, they are at least theoretically allow you to speed between places, right? In your private automobile. But here, the freeway has instead become this kind of mass river of people, right? With cars only occupying the right lanes, the slow lanes, because cars are now so rare. Uh-huh. Yeah. And those, like the people hanging around the off-ramps are now more or less like almost like permanent camps, right? You know, we're told, you know, there are beggars and water sellers and prostitutes who hang out near the on and off ramps. What's that?
Shantytowns.
What's that?
Almost like shanty towns.
Yeah, yeah. And the other thing I think I want to note here too is that what we've got here is just a river of people walking north, right? Often with no clear goal in mind. And many of them expecting or fearing that they're going to be turned back at the Oregon border, right? You know, they want to get to Oregon or Washington. They want to get to Canada, maybe some of them, right? But there's no guarantee that they'll make it. So what does this kind of look like? I mean, really, what is this? It's an exodus of people. It's a migrant caravan, right?
I also love how, like, because this is just how we travel now. Oh, we're going to get on the 118.
Uh-huh.
118, we're going to go to the 23. 23, we're going to go to US 101. Like, that's still, even without vehicles.
Yeah.
That's how they're traveling
Mhm.
in their head, and that's how we travel.
Sure. Although she only knows this from maps,
Yeah.
right? From looking actually at old maps. Because apparently no one has done made any changes to the interstate highway system in quite some time,
You
right?
know, you got to get rid of public safety.
Yeah.
You got to privatize it.
But yeah, this is not the sort of thing that we expect to see in California, right? This is the kind of thing that we often see, like coming, like up onto our southern border from Central America, right? Except in this case, yeah, the walkers are U.S. citizens, but it seems that the state borders have tightened up, and the states aren't letting people move freely from place to place. And I think, maybe like the use of the word freeway rather than simply highway, I think might also be a little bit ironic. Because the freeway isn't free. Right? It's another place where you're stuck, where you have to constantly watch your back, right? I've never walked a freeway before today. I found the experience both fascinating and frightening. In some ways, the scene reminded me of an old film I saw once in a street in mid-20th century China. Walkers, bicyclers, people carrying, pulling, pushing loads of all kinds. But the freeway crowd is a heterogeneous mass. Black and white, Asian and Latin, whole families are on the move with babies on backs or perched atop loads and carts, wagons or bicycle baskets, sometimes along with an old or handicapped person. Other old, ill, or handicapped people hobbled along as best they could with the help of sticks or fitter companions. Many were armed with sheath knives, rifles, and of course, visible holstered handguns. The occasional passing cop paid no attention. Now, I think the other thing that's going on here, the other thing that's being invoked here, and this is the point we're going to end on, because I think this is something that's going to become more ideologically important in the last third of the novel. Is the myth of the frontier. Does everybody know what I mean by this, what I'm talking about?
Like when people were moving out west, the stories they would tell, like, oh, life is so great out west, there's gold, there's clean water,
these movements of people from the eastern U.S. out to the west, right? Many of whom didn't make it all the way out west. They stopped somewhere in the middle and set up a homestead. But yeah, like, where were the people who were, working their way out to the frontier often going? What was the end goal for a lot of them? Where were they headed? I think when you talked about gold a second ago.
Yeah, California.
Yeah, California was the end goal, right? And here, that myth of the frontier is being turned upside down as people are desperate and struggling to get out of California. Right, so we have the same kind of diaspora, people walking, riding wagons, whatever, right? Just trying to get somewhere else where there's more opportunity because they've exhausted all the opportunities of what used to be the promised land. Okay, so we're going to stop there for now, and we'll finish this up on Wednesday. So let me give you the guide questions for that.
From here, we jump into Mr. Norrell, right?
What's that?
From here.
Yes, from here we will then go into Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. And yeah, I definitely assigned that for after Thanksgiving break on purpose. Not just because it's the latest chronologically that we're looking at, but also because it's the longest, yeah. So, trying to give people a little bit more time to get through it.
Did you ever watch I think it was on the BBC?
Yeah.